The other day I was doing Braintree quests, and it got me thinking way too much. Like, what even is the Braintree and the Esophager, and where did they come from? And is their relationship simply based on some sort of symbiotic survival, or do they have a deeper and more rich history, maybe even a friendship that we just don't know about? I was shocked upon looking into it to discover just how deep the roots of this story go. It touches on the Deserted Fairgrounds and the Haunted Woods, and even the city of Neopets, which was involved in the Tale of Woe plot. Despite the depth of the story, there was a surprising amount of holes in the lore that needed to be connected together. So I've spent the past few weeks reading and taking notes and stitching the story together like some sort of adorable little patchwork horror. And I did make sure to indicate when there was little or no information on the topic if I had to take some creative license with this story to bridge gaps, but that will be clearly articulated on the screen to avoid confusion. Despite the semi-patchwork nature of this information, one thing is certain: the Braintree and the Esophager are deeply intertwined in the fabric of Neopia and the evolution of its history. Understanding their origins and relationships really adds a layer of depth and a new kind of understanding to the adventures that we have here in the virtual world. So let's jump into this story of deception and triumph and how far some people will go to help the ones that they love. Long ago, the Haunted Woods was the barrier between the realms of the living and the realms of the dead. The Braintree and the Esophager both played vital roles in helping to maintain the equilibrium. The Braintree acted as a wise and ancient sentinel, cataloging the information of all Neopians who had passed away. In keeping the records and maintaining the details, he ensured that all Neopians would live on forever within his memory. Meanwhile, the Esophager consumed objects that had long outlived their usefulness. The objects would be brought to him as an offering, and he would digest them, extracting vital information and creation magic from them. This process was almost a reverse alchemy, because it was taking physical objects and it was turning them into pure magic. The origins and the creation story of both the Esophager and the Braintree are largely unknown, and many believe that this is because of the fact that they have existed within the Haunted Woods since long before the Haunted Woods was even known by that name. The ancient Neopians revered the Braintree as a god, and they performed many rituals for him, very similar to some of the rituals that we see gods of wisdom having performed for them within ancient Egypt. His roots intertwined with the very fabric of life and death within the Haunted Woods. They believed that in the Braintree's cataloging all of the information, he was retaining the lives of all of the Neopians who had passed on, so in a way he was providing an afterlife. This ensured that their love and their memories and everything like that continued to perpetuate throughout time, even when they were no longer in their physical bodies. This sacred task made the Braintree a cornerstone of their spiritual life and their worship. He also served as a way to connect them with their ancestors and their lost loved ones. The Braintree's partner in this divine process is the Esophager, a gelatinous entity with an insatiable hunger. The Esophager and Braintree are two separate organisms, but they work together much like the way that your brain and your stomach do. The Esophager serves as the stomach, where it will break down and digest the physical items to create the energy to nourish the brain. Just like our digestive system, that energy is then delivered back up to the Braintree. It was a perfect partnership, because without the Esophager, the Braintree wouldn't be able to devour the dense amount of information that it required to be able to survive and to be able to thrive. And without the Braintree, the followers would have had no reason to bring all of these items to the Esophager to have them be devoured. Because of this relationship, we have to hypothesize that the Braintree and the Esophager were created around the same time. If they weren't, how would either of the entities have been able to survive without the other one? Time marched on and things within the Haunted Woods began to change. A new chapter in Neopian history began to unravel right in front of their eyes. Just outside of the fairgrounds existed a town called Neovia. Neovia thrived until one day a mysterious croc named Mr. Crowley showed up with magical potions that promised to deliver everything that the townsfolk had ever wanted. This potion functioned almost like a wish spell, where it would grant the townsfolk's greatest desires, but unfortunately, it would continue to grow and exacerbate that until it started to take over their personality and eventually their lives. The townsfolk started to become physically disfigured, and they turned into monsters. In their panic, the townsfolk turned to their mayor and they demanded that he find Mr. Crowley. But unfortunately, Mr. Crowley had taken his profits and he had slunk away into the darkness. We're introduced to our main characters, Reginald and Bruno, and we find out that their little sister Sophie has not been affected by the potion. Bruno has Reginald take her out into the woods to try to find her some safety. Reginald runs into an earth fairy by the name of Illyri out in the woods while he's trying to find a safe place for his sister. He's very reluctant, but he believes that this may be the only safe place for his sister. Sophie for some reason feels very comfortable with Illyri and tells her brother that it's okay and that she wants to stay here with her. Reginald then returns to the town to complete his transformation into a beast. When Reginald returned to the town, he saw that the townsfolk had all swarmed Bruno and they were getting ready to attack. They had blamed their family for promoting the use of the potion in the first place. Things began to turn violent outside of their family residence as Bruno fought them off with all of his might. His parents cowered inside of their home, hearing the noises outside but powerless to help their son. Bloodied and battered, Bruno fled and was chased out of town. Reginald made it back to Neovia with just enough time to see Bruno getting chased off into the forest. He took advantage of the lull in the chaos and he ran inside to warn his parents that it was time to leave. Under the cover of night, Reginald was able to sneak his family off to an old abandoned mason that him and Bruno used to play in when they were children. From outside of the window, he could hear the roar of the angry crowd. They had lost Bruno in the woods, and they were now looking for Reginald and the rest of the family. As the crowd called for blood, the mayor broke their shouts into a silence and said that he had an idea. He told the crowd that the time for revenge and blame would come soon, but that they needed to work together now if they were ever going to solve this curse. Magic begets magic, the mayor said. We need to summon the spirit of slumber. So working together, the townsfolk all prepared and performed the ritual required to summon the spirit. When he appeared, the townsfolk pleaded with him to please remove the potion's effect and end their suffering. The spirit of slumber explained to them that he could lessen the potion's effects, but that it would come at a great cost to them. The townsfolk agreed without a second thought, being so desperate to return to who they used to be. The spirit waved his staff and he cast a spell upon the town. And just as he had promised, it did indeed come at a terrible cost. Meanwhile, on the other side of the haunted woods, we're introduced to an Usul named Gilly, who is adventuring through the haunted woods and stumbles upon Neovia. She takes a locket that she finds in the rubble over to the Deserted Fairgrounds to see if anyone can identify it for her. All Sydney can tell her is that it's an old locket. He doesn't really know who it belongs to. So she decides to go deeper into the woods to see if she can find some answers. She stumbles upon a shack where we see maybe a pretty familiar looking Ixie, and Gilly begins to inquire to the Ixie what happened to the town. She also reveals the locket that she found. The Ixie gets very angry with her and tells her that it's time for her to leave. She's interrupted her work and she wants her out. A storm drives Gilly deep into a cave, where she finds a very disgusting scene of rotten food. She hears some footsteps and hides, and out of the darkness emerges Bruno. Gilly pops up from behind the mirror that Bruno's looking into, and it scares him so badly that he falls and he hits his head on the ground. Gilly feels terrible and decides to help him, and when Bruno comes to, he starts chasing her. Unsure where to go, she runs back to the shack. She pounds on the door and the Ixie throws the door open, and then suddenly notices who was chasing her. In the same instant, Bruno and Sophie recognize each other, and after all of these years, they are reunited. Since Bruno was chased away into the woods, he never actually knew if Reginald was able to get her to safety. So for all of those years, Bruno never knew if his sister was alive or dead. Bruno explains to Sophie that he had run away to a cave, and that he had been living there to avoid the angry mob of monsters that had chased him deep into the woods. Bruno admitted it was very hard living alone. Sophie tells us that after she was taken in by Illyri, she was given a magical chest that would populate anything that she could possibly need. And then the fairy vanished. A few days later, she journeyed back home and found that the town had been abandoned. Many other times she would travel back to the town, and suddenly on Halloween night, she found a surprise. The town was full of people again. She noticed that it was a little strange, though. As she was walking around, she tried to touch one of the townsfolk, and her hand went right through them. These people were shells. They weren't even in physical bodies anymore. Convinced that she could help, Sophie ran back to her house and started concocting potions. She worked on it all night, but when she arrived back in the town in the morning, it was empty and everyone was gone. Every Halloween, Sophie returns to the town with a new potion, trying to cure her people and return them to their normal state. Gilly mentions that magic begets magic, so there had to be a spell that could undo the spell that the spirit of slumber made, right? After 10 years, there's not much, though, that Sophie hadn't tried. The group decides to find the fairy Illyri to try to get answers about their questions. The three set off on an adventure together over the river and through the haunted woods until they finally arrive at Illyri's house. They explain to Illyri that they need help breaking the curse that was created by the spirit of slumber. Illyri is reluctant to help because the spirit of slumber is so strong. In a demonstration of strength, Bruno goes after Illyri himself. They roll around and fight until Sophie gets aggravated and yells at both of them to stop. She separates them with her magic, and Bruno is very angered, saying that the fairy is so powerful but still refuses to help them. Illyri is so impressed by how powerful Sophie is that she thinks they may have a chance after all, so she offers to give them a little bit of advice. Illyri tells them to go find a being that has lived in the forest for longer than she has. She says they may actually know more about the creature than she does. She did, however, reveal that in his past life he was a Neopet. Gilly suggests that they go see one of the oldest beings in the haunted woods, the Brain Tree. Sophie, however, is very reluctant to see him, saying that she's had a bad experience with him in the past. When Gilly begins to pressure her too much about what her bad experience was with the Braintree, Sophie reacts very poorly and she attacks her with her magic. Bruno jumps in and tells Sophie that she needs to get over her grudge. This information is vital and it has been long enough. Sophie reluctantly apologizes and the crew head off to the Braintree to talk to him about the Spirit of Slumber. The Braintree reveals that he cannot tell the true name of the Spirit of Slumber until they can reveal to him when he died. When they head to ask the Esophager this question, Sophie reveals that she's also apparently had a bad experience with him, but they decide to push forward and go anyways. The Esophager tells us that he can only tell us where somebody died if he can actually verify that they are indeed dead. And the only way that he can do that is by getting their real name and searching his records. This creates the ultimate Neopian catch-22. Sophie devises a plan to be able to identify him by his bones. In order to do that, they have to go back to the Neovian graveyard and they have to dig up every single grave until they find the one whose bones will react correctly with the potion. They travel back to the town and they gather all of the information and the reagents that they need. They get everything together and then they return to the Neovian graveyard and they begin desecrating all of the graves there. One by one, they tested the skeletons until finally, Gilly dumped the potion onto a bone, and it started to glow brightly in silver in her hands. "That's it!" Sophie exclaimed, and she turned around to see that the gravestone from that grave was missing. She was understandably frustrated. "The only way that I can figure this out is by going through the gravedigger's ledger and cross-referencing the names in the book to all of the remaining gravestones. When I get to the end of it, I should have one name left, and that's the missing gravestone." She also scours the library, trying to find any spell that could possibly be the correct one to summon the spirit. After some time, she finally locates the perfect spell, but she tells Bruno that it won't work. In order for this spell to take effect, somebody has to willingly allow the spirit to enter their body. Bruno steps forward and says, "I'll do it." "That's way too dangerous," Sophie says. But Bruno insists. He says it's the only way that he can bring his family back. Reluctantly, Sophie allows him to drink the potion. Almost instantly, the Spirit of Slumber manifests, and it takes over Bruno's body. Sophie beseeches him, "Spirit of Slumber, I need you to cast a reverse spell to remove the curse from the people of Neovia." A very foreign voice came out of Bruno's mouth and said, "So be it." When Sophie and Gilly are walking back to Neovia, Sophie reveals that the locket that Gilly found was actually hers. It was a gift to her from her mother when she was a young girl. As they approach the town, they see an eerie glow. All of the ghostly figures have appeared, as tonight again is Halloween night. Bruno began to glow and raised up his hands and yelled, "Let the spell be undone." Almost instantly, the people of Neovia began to change again. Sophie sees her parents change back. As the spirit leaves Bruno's body, he says, "Did it work?" He and Sophie share a gleeful moment, while Gilly does one of those, hey guys? To Sophie's horror, she turns to see that the townsfolk have all returned to their transmogrified beast-like state, and they were pissed. Without the Spirit of Slumber spell protecting them anymore, the potion was free to run rampant. And after all, the spirit did exactly what he said he would do. He lifted the curse. He didn't negate the potion. Sophie watched in horror as her beloved parents' faces changed and disfigured into the monsters that she remembered from her childhood. She was so terrified that she ran out of the town square, leaving Bruno and Gilly behind. "Look what they have wrought upon us! Destroy them!" the mayor screeched. As the town people set upon them, Bruno spotted Mr. Crowley in the crowd, the croc who had started all of this nonsense. "Go after the croc, Gilly. I'm going to take care of the crowd," Bruno said, and he balled his fists up and ran into the angry fray. Gilly pursued Crowley into the graveyard where he enchanted the tombstones and they attacked her. Picking up a shovel, she shattered them and continued to pursue him. In his escape, he enchanted the very trees of the haunted woods as well, which set upon her. She destroyed those as well and caught up to him just as he entered a very spooky-looking mansion. Gilly confronts him at the front steps saying, "You're the one who sold the potion to the town, aren't you?" And he says, "Why, Crowley is the name. You don't seek me though, my girl. What you seek lies inside." Gilly says, "You're lying. Why would I trust you?" Crowley smiled and said, "Don't you think I led you here for a reason?" Suddenly, a call of "brains" rang up from behind Gilly, and she turned around to see a zombified Aisha pursuing her and Crowley from the gates. Behind her was the corpse of so many of the Neovians that they had dug up from the graveyard, and they were all coming after her. "You best make up your mind soon, girl, for the way is fast becoming barred," Crowley croaked at her. And with a flick of his wrist, the gates slammed shut behind her, and she was totally trapped. Back in Neovia, it's clear that the townsfolk still blame Bruno and his family for the potion changing them forever. The mayor whips them into a frenzy, calling for vengeance and saying that Bruno needs to pay for his family's crimes. The entire town sets upon Bruno in an angry mob, and it's a regular frickin' monster mash. Wave after wave, the sea of monsters sets upon him, Bruno fighting valiantly, trying to keep his head above water. He eventually became overwhelmed and decided he needed to find somewhere to hide. Creating a break in the crowd, Bruno rushed down an alleyway and took a sharp left, losing them, and heading towards the old abandoned mason that he and his brother used to play at when they were children. Looking for his parents, he heard footsteps, and he decided to hide in the cellar. To Bruno's horror, it was his parents, who had joined the angry mob and were looking for his blood as well. Bruno watched helplessly from the cellar, longing for the ability to help them and change them back into the people that he loved and remembered from his childhood. Meanwhile, Sophie has returned to her shack with a new determination to make the perfect spell or potion that will finally get rid of this curse. It's Halloween night. She won't have a chance for another year. It has to be tonight. She loads her bag up with several concoctions, but she knows that there's still some missing ingredient that she needs to make this potion successful. Next, we see Gilly still trapped in the creepy haunted manor, and as she wanders around, she stumbles into a corpse that has this beautiful glowing flower pinned to the lapel. In a land of death, this is the only thing that still has life in it. Gilly knows that it's special, so she takes it with her and she runs out of the mansion, barely escaping the zombie army. With the attention on the zombie hordes behind her, she smacks right into Sophie on the path. She shows Sophie the flower from the asylum, and Sophie grabs her shoulder saying, "This is the missing ingredient from the potion," because of course it is. It begins glowing when Sophie adds it to the potion, and the two of them return to the town to add it to the water supply to try to cure the people. Sophie pulls out her wand and uses her magic to defend them. Her power cracks through the streets of Neovia as she throws monsters back. As her and Gilly rush forward towards the well, they arrive at the town square to see the mayor already waiting for them. He gives her one chance to walk away, and Sophie says, "I'll take my chances." They get into a sick Kamehameha battle, which ends in the mayor overpowering her and slapping her to the ground. Bruno takes the mayor down and he goes to check on Sophie, but unfortunately the mayor is not completely out. The mayor goes full-on Transmog Super Saiyan and he rips his neat little vest. It's an all-out battle royale at this time, with Bruno biting him and Sophie zapping him, and I don't really know what Gilly's doing. I guess she's probably like scratching him with her little oosel claws. And then our girl Sophie, the baddest bitch around, turns him into a maquat. Like a pet. Like, get wrecked. Sophie begs Bruno to take the potion, but he says that they have to give it to the town people first. They dump the potion in the well, and when they come back in the morning, everybody has started to change. The town of Neovia is restored to its original glory. After the big reunion, they tell Bruno that it's his turn to drink the water now too. He takes a big gulp of the water from the well, and everyone watches as nothing happens. "Oh no, Bruno," says Sophie, "you must have been under the potion's effect for too long." But Bruno says that's okay. "I'm used to looking like this now, and my family and friends accept me for who I am, so I'm okay." And with Crowley on looking from the foreground, they all live happily ever after. The curse is lifted, the town is saved, and for now, everyone is happy. In the end, Crowley kind of redeems himself by leading Gilly to the asylum to show her where the flower is. But he was the one that caused the problem in the first place. So let me know in the comments what you think. Is he still a bad guy, or did he redeem himself when he led Gilly to the flower and ended up helping to save the town in the long run? By the time Gilly enters our story, the fairgrounds had already been deserted and shut down. But do you ever wonder why they were deserted in the first place? This is one of the aspects of Haunted Woods lore that is not well documented through official Neopian channels. There are a few stories that are documented that talk about the initial creation of the carnival, but other than a very small amount of detail that I could find of some mysterious tragedy that happened, there's not really a lot of information about why the fairgrounds shut down. This is the part of the video where we're going to divert from canon, just a little bit. I will include as much official information in this story as I can. But like I mentioned, this part of Neopian history is not well documented. So I would like to walk you through my fan theory about how the Deserted Fairgrounds got deserted in the first place. The Haunted Fairgrounds is a story of hubris and mistakes. Its tattered tents and dilapidated rides serve as a reminder of how great this fair used to be, and just how far it has fallen into obscurity and legend. The fairgrounds was established by a group of very ambitious Neopian investors. Driven by their greed and their quest for profit, they ignored the warnings that came from a mysterious cloaked and masked being. This stranger claimed that the land was uninhabitable. But despite all of these warnings, development continued. But unfortunately, what you don't know can still kill you. Completely ignorant to what happens in the town of Neovia on Halloween night, they planned to open the fairgrounds on that very same evening. On the opening night, the carnival was alive with laughter and joy. The crowd was enjoying games like Coco Shy and Bagatelle. They were winning prizes at the Cork Gun Gallery and enjoying the thrilling rides at the Carnival of Terror. A Zweetok swung the hammer on the Test Your Strength game, and an Akara spun the Wheel of Misfortune. Neopians from far and wide came dressed up in their finest Halloween regalia, some dressed as fairies, and one even dressed up as Dr. Sloth. And each little monster blended in seamlessly with the Halloween backdrop. As midnight approached, an eerie chill swept through the fairgrounds. The once vibrant lights began to flicker, and an unsettling silence began to settle over the crowd. At first, the Neopians didn't notice anything unusual. The ghosts of Neovia had mingled in perfectly amongst the guests, totally unnoticed underneath their Halloween costumes. These poor captured souls were jealous of the revelers and their freedom, and they wanted them to pay for their hubris. It all started with a little Kachik, who noticed that one of the costume guests was a little bit too realistic. His hands trembled and his eyes widened with fear when he realized that this was not a costume. It was a real ghost. Panic ensued as the angered Neovians started to take revenge against any of the non-transmogrified Neopets who had attended the fair that evening. The innocents tried desperately to escape the horrifying scene at the fairgrounds. In their haste, the black iron gates became a scene of chaos, with everyone trying to fit through and flee at once. In the panic, many Neopians were hurt, and some of them were even said to have vanished, never to be heard from again. As the bells rang out midnight, the gates were closed, and all of the Neopians were trapped inside. When dawn finally broke, the fairgrounds were a scene of utter devastation. The once bright and beautiful attractions lay broken and in ruins. The once cheery place was shrouded in an eerie silence, covered in blood-stained earth. This once thriving fairground is now but a desolate wasteland. Authorities searched through the wreckage trying to find any evidence of the missing survivors, but unfortunately, they found nothing but more evidence of chaos. In some capacity, the fairgrounds is still in operation today. If you're feeling lucky, you can stop in and buy a scratch card from Sydney, or you can try your hand of luck at the Wheel of Misfortune. If you want to get ridiculed, you can visit Arnold and test your strength, or stop on by the totally not rigged Coco Shy game. There's some vendors here that are still in operation, so if you're feeling brave, go ahead and stop by the Deserted Fairgrounds. But remember, never stay past midnight. That ends my fanfiction portion. This next part is an official Neopian story called The Beast from Behind the Tree. It exists within the site as a Neopedia article. This chilling story adds yet another layer of lore to the Braintree and the Haunted Woods. Enter Samantha, an adventurous walkie who had traveled far and wide across Neopia. Her curiosity was piqued by a pamphlet that was advertising travel to the Haunted Woods. In a small article in the very back, it made mention of a beast that lived behind the Braintree. Determined to learn more, Samantha set off on her quest for the Haunted Woods. When she arrived, the Deserted Fairgrounds were as lively and as eerie as ever. Edna was working busily on her spells, and the esophager was screaming for food, and a large portion of the fairgrounds had been roped off. She was told because of a mysterious accident that had happened years ago. She lingered for a while near the merry-go-round, and when security turned their back, she slipped under the rope and ran off to the Braintree. Samantha inquired to the Braintree about the beast that lived behind it, and to her surprise, the Braintree, who normally boasts about his vast knowledge, pretended to have no idea what she was talking about. Unconvinced, Samantha decided to return under the cover of night and do some investigating for herself. She found a place to hide out until the sun set, and under the cover of darkness, Samantha crept from underneath the dilapidated ride and started to explore the deep, dark Haunted Woods. Her flashlight revealed deep shadows and strange movements as she crunched her way down the path. She cautiously followed it until it narrowed down to a point where she had to squeeze through. Her heart pounded with anticipation and fear. She stumbled into a clearing with many stones that were placed into a precise pattern. Bones littered the ground, adding to the eerie atmosphere. As Samantha explored, her boot accidentally dislodged one of the stones. Suddenly, the ground within the pattern darkened, and a hulking, shadowy figure began to emerge. A beast that was beyond her description. Samantha ran for her life, the beast tearing after her, its claws digging into the earth, snapping the bones of the fallen Neopets as it scurried after her. Samantha dove. She barely made it through the crevice between the brain tree and the grove and wriggled her way through to safety. The beast's claws raked her clothing, and she could feel its breath on her body as she tumbled to the ground and to safety. The brain tree roared and thrashed its branches, battling the beast back. After some moments, the growling subsided and the beast retreated. Samantha saw the great gouges in the tree, and she felt so guilty, approaching it with sorrow in her eyes. She apologized, realizing that the tree was just trying to protect her from the lurking danger that existed behind it. While this tale does add a spine-chilling layer to the lore, it also underscores a deep reflection of the human condition, holding up a mirror to our own relentless quests for meaning and resolution. The Braintree's insatiable hunger for knowledge is not unlike our own unquenchable quest for constant improvement. Oftentimes we pursue that at the cost of all else, where profits and advancements are valued over things like human kindness and ethics. Meanwhile, the esophager's constant need to consume is not unlike our drive as humans to acquire and possess and consume everything that we see. If we seek only to fulfill these shallow desires, it can lead us to living a very empty and unhappy existence. This narrative invites us to examine how unchecked desires like this can dominate and control our lives. It's a poignant reminder that through resilience, perseverance, and a little compassion, we can overcome our own inner selfishness and ethical struggles to leave a lasting positive impact on this world that we exist in, long after we are gone. When we live a life filled with kindness and compassion, we invite others to do the same, spreading an environment of growth and improvement for the future generations of this world. That concludes this episode of Behind the Pixels. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments if you have a topic that you would like me to do the next lore deep dive on. If you enjoyed this content, please like and follow. And hey, remember, if life ever gets too heavy, feel free to come back here for another chill quest. Love y'all!